Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at something that seems really basic,
Mm-hmm.
the English alphabet.
Right.
But, as with all of our deep dives, we try to go a little bit deeper, and I think you'll find this one really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And you sent over some notes
Mhm.
from a module on the English alphabet and pronunciation.
Yes,
And, when you think about it, we use this every single day.
we do.
It's incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah, just the fact that we have this system, these 26 letters,
Right.
and all the sounds that we can make with them, and all the words and sentences and books and stories that we can tell and have told
Right.
with just these 26 letters
Mm-hmm.
is mind-blowing.
Yeah, and we never really stop and think about it, do we?
We don't.
I mean, it's just
We learn it as kids, and then we just kind of take it for granted.
absolutely. And so much of it is just kind of absorbed, you know?
Yes.
It's like when you start to think about the origins of these letters
Yes.
and where they came from, it's a whole other layer.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to explore today.
Definitely.
We're not just going to be reciting the ABCs,
Yeah.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Right.
We're going to be going beyond that
Absolutely going deeper.
and really trying to understand the why.
Mm-hmm.
Why is pronunciation so important in English?
Right. And it's interesting because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that English language learners face
Yes.
is the discrepancy between how a word looks and
Right.
how it sounds.
Yes. And this is something that I have experienced
Sure.
firsthand, living in other countries and trying to speak other languages,
Of course.
where what you see is what you get.
Yes.
But in English, that is not the case
Absolutely not.
at all.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really important point to start with, is that, English is this kind of crazy language that
Right.
has all these rules and then breaks all the rules.
Exactly.
And so we need to be aware of that, and we need to be aware of how that impacts pronunciation. So let's start with the building blocks then.
Okay.
We've got our 26 letters.
Yep.
And we know them, right?
Might be
D,
deeper.
A, B, C, all the way to
Yeah.
X, Y, Z.
Right.
But I think it's interesting to pick out a few of these letters
Oh, wait.
and maybe talk about their origins or some of the quirks of their
Yeah.
pronunciation.
Sure.
So one that comes to mind for me is W.
Oh, interesting one.
It's like, what is this letter?
It's a strange one.
It's a W,
Yeah.
but it looks like a double V.
It does, doesn't it?
And so why is that?
Well, it actually has a really interesting history.
Does it?
Yeah, so originally it was actually just two V's written together, and then over time it kind of morphed into this separate letter.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the name W reflects that origin,
Yeah.
So it's like a little reminder of where it came from,
Uh-huh.
which I think is fascinating.
So what about another letter that has like a weird
Okay.
pronunciation quirk?
Well, I mean, we can't talk about pronunciation quirks without talking about C.
Oh, yeah, C is a tricky one.
Right.
It can be hard or soft.
Exactly.
Sometimes it sounds like a K.
Like in cat.
Cat.
Exactly.
And then sometimes it sounds like an S.
like in city.
City.
Right.
So how do we know?
Well, there are some rules of thumb, but to be honest, a lot of it comes down to just memorization and exposure to the language.
So what you're saying is we just have to learn
Teaching much.
all the words.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are patterns and rules, but
Hmm.
English is notorious for being a bit of a rule breaker.
Yes, it is.
So sometimes you just have to kind of go with it.
Roll with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these letters.
Right.
And they make sounds.
They do.
And that leads us to the next big topic, which is pronunciation.
Mm.
And, we've already talked a little bit about how English can be tricky
Yeah.
with its pronunciation.
Definitely.
But why is pronunciation so important?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you want to be understood, right? If you're not pronouncing words correctly, people might not understand you.
Right.
But beyond that, it's about so much more than just being understood.
Uh-huh.
Pronunciation is about conveying meaning.
Yes.
It's about adding emphasis.
Yes.
It's about creating a certain rhythm and flow to your speech.
It's about bringing the language to life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's often overlooked.
It is.
We think of pronunciation as just this kind of technical aspect of language,
Mhm.
but it's so much more than that.
Absolutely.
It's really what gives the language its soul.
Yeah, and one of the things that makes English pronunciation so complex and interesting is the fact that English borrows words from so many different languages.
Right, we were talking about that earlier.
Exactly. And so you have all these different influences
Yeah.
coming together, and that creates this really rich tapestry of sounds.
Yeah, and that's what makes English so expressive, but also so challenging.
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the letters, the
Right?
sounds. Now let's talk about words.
Okay.
And the notes that you sent over mentioned reading and writing simple words.
Yes.
And I think this is a good place to start because even simple words in English
Yeah.
can be tricky to pronounce.
Oh, absolutely.
And, we've talked about some of the reasons for that, like silent letters.
Like the K in night.
Night.
Yeah.
Why is that K there?
I know. It's just there to trip us up.
Yeah, it's a silent letter.
It is.
And then there are letters that make unexpected sounds.
Like the CH in choir.
Oh, yeah.
Choir. Which sounds like a K.
Yeah, it does.
It's crazy.
Right? So how do we make sense of all of this?
Well, I think it's helpful to think of English pronunciation as a puzzle.
Okay.
There are all these different pieces.
Mm-hmm.
The letters, the sounds, the rules, the exceptions, and we have to figure out how to put them all together. And it takes time and it takes practice.
It does.
But it's also a lot of fun.
It is. It's like a game.
It is.
Yeah.
And the more you play, the better you get at it.
So true.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap up,
Okay.
we've gone from the very basic ABCs
Mm-hmm.
to really appreciating
Yes.
the nuances of English pronunciation.
Absolutely.
And I think this has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as well.
Me too.
Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about how pronunciation affects how we speak English.
Right.
But how does it affect how we listen?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to just kind of tune out when we're listening to someone speak.
Mm-hmm.
But if we start to pay attention to the nuances of pronunciation,
Yes.
the different accents, the subtle ways that people shape sounds,
Mm-hmm.
it can really open up a whole new world of understanding.
That's a great point.
So I encourage you to really listen to the way people speak English
Mm.
and see what you can discover.
Yeah, that's a great challenge
It is.
for our listeners.
Yeah,
Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive.
it has.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.